Namaskar, everyone. And as Neil pointed out, it's a very Bangalore heavy panel. So let me start by saying, yeah, welcome from a beautiful city of Bangalore. I live here. 24 degrees. It's a clear sky, clean air. Our sun is trying to peek through the clouds, and nature is also looking at its best. I'm sitting in my kids' room, so the Hot Wheels is pretty much visible out there. And and weekend after weekend, we have been actually talking about restarting our economy, restarting our work and our life. And I keep emphasizing on this fact that whenever we do that, we must include, emission, pollution, and a reduction on these things whenever we restart our economies. Let's take this opportunity of making sure that the new life and the new economic strategies are more resilient, they're low carbon, and it is more prosperous recovery, if I may say so. So today's discussion is about the roadmap to the economic revival, and we got some fabulous speakers. And just a pretext to this, and some of my personal viewpoint, and I feel that uh, the COVID-19 pandemic has brought a global economic activity to a virtual halt. And while the world was long expecting a recession, the pandemic has surely, pulled the trigger. The global trade has been undergoing several disruptions, and heightened trade tensions between US and China has only made the matters worse. And as for India, our limited share in the global trade, along with the battered domestic and global outlook, I think it provides a very little room to contribute from the export market to the growth. And I personally feel that government expenditure is one of the key components that can aid the growth moving forward. And Neil is smiling because I'm sure I'm going to take some views on him. And but infrastructure has strong links to growth. And with both supply and demand side, features that generate a great employment and also build some long-term assets, if I may say so. Prime Minister Modi's 13th May speech, where we all heard of a word called Atmanirbhar. And thereafter we've been hearing a lot of mantras onto vocal for local, and localization and stuff like that. And I think that's another market consumption, for the local goods, and it's a great thing. And I remember Mahatma Gandhi always saying that self-sufficient village economy, and probably that's coming so true in today's time. But I'm not an economist. We have some outstanding four leaders with us today, and allow me to introduce them. And so we have Anuj Kalra, who is a CFO for Kaljus, is a global CFO for one of their ophthalmic devices businesses. And what's good about Anuj is he's also very passionately involved into the company's corporate social responsibilities, and he's been working very, very closely on that front on a global level. Then we have Mr. JC Sharma, Vice Chairman and Managing Director for Shobha Limited. Sharma ji has 19 years with Shobha, and he has steered the company to become one of the most respected and trusted real estate brands in the Indian market. He's a speaker on various industry bodies. He sits on various industry bodies, works with the government, and to make sure that yes, there is some kind of a synergy, and such an important sector comes to the real highlight of the town. Then we have Mr. Manoj Nambiar. He's a managing director and board member of Arohan Financial Services, and he's also the chairman for Microfinance Institutions Network. Microfinance, in fact, serves around close to 60 million end clients and impacts a life of more than 300 million people. And Manoj is very closely working in steering the sector together in challenging external environment. Welcome, Manoj. Rakesh Srivastava would join us. Rakesh is a managing director for Nissan India, and he has almost more than 2 decades of experience in the automobile industry, and probably we'll hear from him what's happening in the auto space. And to moderate the conversation, we have Neil Ratan, Managing Partner North for PwC India. Neil has over 3 decades of experience serving clients across the areas of innovative technology oriented initiatives for the government, government strategy, government process reform, capacity building, IT governance, program management for large and complex project. And I would personally love to hear his views on the government spending that I personally feel is the biggest step for the economic revival. And also the important question is, does the government have the money to do all this? A very warm welcome to all our speakers. There's such a learned and experienced panel, and we can only expect a highly engaging and insightful conversation. And as I said, I will return towards the end of the conversation to know what's happening in the life of the speakers other than the work. And Neil, welcome again, and the screen is all yours.
Hey, thanks a lot, Deepak. Thanks a lot. And I think welcome everyone to this wonderful afternoon. And the good part of having such a distinguished panel, the moderator jobs become very easy because the panel can kind of pretty much manage on its own. I think one apologies from my side. I think Rakesh Srivastava, Managing Director Nissan, has not been able to join for some technical difficulties. But if that gets sorted, he will. But moving on, I think the Deepak, just to carry your conversation forward, and since you already prompted on the government end, and I'll take a minute to move on. One thing good if we look at, while there are lots and lots of expectation, one basic expectation which seems to have got filled up well is that there's practically nobody going hungry in the country today. A job may be lost, and which is kind of otherwise the amount of money which we've spent on that could have been used to keep one industry revived, could have been kept to, if only we had to keep the say the travel and tourism industry live with the airports and the airlines and the hotels. The entire money which has been spent on feeding people until November every month, 5 kg ration everybody, is similar. So I think for a country like India, when we look at it, the other point that you mentioned in terms of limited resources, that goes without saying. So if we have to choose between, do we get our airlines remain healthy, and I mean no disrespect there, and I'm just taking as an example, versus making sure everybody has enough to eat. I think everybody on the panel and on the speaker would agree that the choice at that end is right. But yes, whether that's the only segment to deal for, whether something more needs to be done, I think those are questions which should be asked, will need to be answered. Okay, from there, I think moving on, two questions actually which come to my mind, and I'd want to pick on the panel in a little more detail, and which I think I'm sure in many of our attendees and everybody's mind come in pretty important. The first one is, with the new supply chain ecosystem disruption happening across the world, the China word that it is being said, the way the new supply chain rebalancing is happening, is India ready to play in that game? The disruption and the new normal which we are all hearing about, in this space, can India do something significant? And second, I think biggest question each of us are facing is around that, look, is India doing enough or what can India do more from a restarting standpoint? Yes, we are into Unlock 3 and all that is going on, but so moving on from this side, maybe I start with Anuj. Anuj, in your new role as the global CFO, you would be making investment decisions in terms of where should the next plant come in, and so on and so forth. So asking you the globalization question, so two things, if you can lay your emphasis on. One, what could the government do and what could industry do to make sure that investments, supply chain investments, global, are coming into India?
Sure, Neil, as you rightly said, I think now India is being looked at as a strong alternative. I think we have seen many examples over the last few months. Whether it's an example of iPhone, I think this is a very prominent example which comes to everybody's mind. I think India has answered to your specific question. India has got some success stories. So whether we look at the two-wheeler market or we look at the pharma industry, I think that these are some of the two industries which stand out very prominently. I think they have proven whether it comes the question of the R&D, it's pretty strong. The cash reserves are good. The profitability is good. So these two industries, I think, have proven over the last few years. I think learning from these two industries, I think a couple of things which they have done well is one, they were very aspirational. So if I take an example of, let's say, the two-wheeler industry, Hero, for example, had an aspiration to be the number one globally. Now, do we see that the same level of aspiration across all the sectors? Today, the answer is no. I would like to share an example from Zeiss. So we set up the manufacturing unit for the eyeglass in 2012, and one of the key challenges which we had at that point of time was how do we compete with China, who has got scale, the automation? Are we going to compete in terms of the quality? Are we going to compete in terms of the cost per lens, etc.? So and the service quality as well. Being German, who's very wants this very high precision, very high standards of quality. So those were all the questions that we had. First couple of years were quite difficult, but I think over a period of time, now where we stand, the development is we are the number one within the global network of the manufacturing units we have. So we are number one in terms of the cost, quality, consistency. So today, some of our the biggest the European customers, they want, if given a preference, they would want to buy from India, not from any other plant in the world. So this is so we were a little bit aspirational that we wanted to compete with China. I think it's again always healthy to have that internal healthy competition. So I think we could prove. Now, coming to your the second question, I think if India has to move to the next level of manufacturing, what could government do? I think there are maybe pretty long list of things that which can be done. But I think if I have to highlight one area, definitely would take the labor law reforms. I think the labor law reforms that we have in the country today are quite outdated. I'm sure Mr. Sharma as well as Manoj would agree on that. So the laws we have are pretty much the pre-colonial or pre-independence era regulations. So I think we have some of the problems in terms of the union. So the market is not as matured as, say, some of the Western world, where you have the unions even, let's say, in the European countries, but they are a lot more matured. So we don't have that sort of maturity. I think there are quite long list of the labor law compliances you have to do, which a lot of times is not necessarily the productive for the organizations. And third is I think that today the organizations don't really have a lot of independence, and that creates a bottleneck for the competencies. So I think if the government has to focus on something, I would say the labor law reform should sort of should stand out. If we are able to address that, I think that can open the good avenues for us.
Thanks a lot, Anuj, on that. I think moving on to you, Manoj. I think in terms of we heard of your great microfinance capabilities and the need of or the impact microfinance can play for reviving the economy is kind of absolutely well known. So any thoughts from you in terms of how could the revival, is it really happening? What more could be done around that? Because credit is going to be one of the most important aspects for that, and in particular microcredit for a country like India.
No, thanks, Neil. Appreciate the opportunity to be here. See, all I want to say is that in a country of 1.3 billion population, as we know, if you look at the status of financial inclusion, right? There was a report which came out from NABARD and Findex about a year and a half back. 42% adult Indians had actually borrowed, right? But within that 42%, only 8% had borrowed from a formal credit institution. So essentially, it means that the remaining people have all borrowed from friends and relatives, from unregulated organizations, right? Chit funds, private finance companies, which were charging the moon, right? So if you look at the insurance penetration, if you look at the bank accounts, which has sort of dramatically improved over the last 2-3 years with the kind of initiatives that the government has taken, but on pension penetration, on remittances opportunities, insurance cover, all of them are in very, very low single digits, right? And when you look at the bottom of the pyramid, there is no way the country can actually grow and reach the level of 9%, 10% GDP growth that we are talking about, unless you have inclusive growth. And financial inclusion itself provides you so many areas where private capital investment can come, right? Today there is technology, today there is Aadhaar in terms of the KYC document, there are credit bureaus available, there is the RBI with its policies where you can start as a sort of not-for-profit organization, you can become an NBFC, you can become a small finance bank, you can even apply to become a universal bank. So the runway for financial inclusion entities is so large, right? So, but having said that, I think the whole larger question, like Deepak mentioned when he was talking about me, when I talk about the microfinance sector, this is a sector which very little is known outside to people who are not directly involved, right? So I'm sure it'll be quite a surprise to all of you when I say that 60 million end clients today are able to access our services, right? And this industry, as a result, impacts about 300 million lives when you look at the family members of those people that we lend to. 99% of customers who we lend to are actually women, right? In a format which has been pioneered by Grameen Bank and Dr. Yunus, right? Which is a group lending model, essentially leveraging social capital as the security, which is used in terms of giving unsecured loans. An industry which was hardly 14,000 crores in 2011 has today reached a level of 2,40,000 crores, impacting 6 crores or 60 million end clients. Now you can understand that even if, let's say, half of those small businesses that we've lent to, right, grow to add one more person in terms of employment, you're talking about 30 million extra people being employed. Right, you're talking about impacting 300 million lives and indirectly impacting the lives of those people whom they have sort of employed. Right, so as India limps back out of the lockdown into unlocking process, into sort of limping back into their livelihoods, we find that there is a great demand for credit at the bottom of the pyramid, because most of the household savings which the families had has been used up in the lockdown process. They all need small amounts of money in order to restart their livelihoods. And that's where it is very, very important. That's why you find the RBI, you find the government, when the PM talks, when the FM talks, when the RBI governor talks, the word MFI is something that you will always hear. And it's primarily because we offer a channel through which credit can be given and collected efficiently. Can you believe this industry works on 99.5% efficiency in terms of collections? So when we talk about corporate bankruptcies, we talk about big groups going down under, right? Can you imagine an unsecured lending business of this size in steady state, right? Of course, there are impacts like floods or pandemic or XYZ things which happen externally, but in a steady state, the credit losses are 50 bips, less than a percentage.
No, lovely. I think I wanted to ask you a specific question on this. Yeah. Are you actually starting to see a revival? Are we getting post to the pre-COVID era in, say, especially in the month of July, if you were to say, if you forget the first quarter? So what's that what you're actually seeing?
So Neil, if you look at the collections, the way they have come back over the last 2 to 3 months, right from April when the slow process of unlocking started to May and then June and July. This industry from almost 0% collections in April, hardly less than 10% collection, because we got just about a week of opening up, right? Moved to about 30-40% in the month of May, moved to 50-60% in the month of June. And in July, we all have reported close to 70-75% efficiency in terms of collections.
New lending?
All this, no, I mean, so July ending, we would probably be about.
No, I'm saying new lending. New lending.
Yeah, so new lending, I would say, has reached almost 50% of the kind of levels that you do, I mean, in terms of a normal month, right? So this is probably one industry which is getting back money, re-lending has started. And as I mentioned to you, the demand at the bottom of the pyramid for people to get credit to link back to their, I mean, in terms of normalcy on their livelihoods is huge. So like we were discussing with the RBI the other day, almost 10,000 crores is what we've estimated as need for emergency loans for existing regular customers in the sector. Because all of them need 5,000, 7,500, 10,000 rupee loans, which will help them clean up their shops, buy new stock, and restart their business. And if
Absolutely.
India has to limp back finally, the traction
Bottom has to
come from bottom.
Absolutely. The bottom has to limp back, really, as you said. I think that's a very important one. I think one point before I move on, I think all the people on the webcast, I think if you have any questions, please use the Q&A box. I can see they've started coming in. We will respond during the conversation or towards the end of it. We will try and respond to as many as we can. So please keep your questions coming. And actually, in a way, I'd saved the best for the last. And in the early conversation we were having, the most interest seemed to be in the real estate sector, one of the largest employers in the country. And all of us have some interest with real estate as house owners or tenants. Each of us need a chat on our head, as we say. Mr. Sharma, it was such an intriguing conversation. So what is your perspective in terms of, are people starting to come and buy houses again? Because the revival of the sector is absolutely crucial for the economy to come back, and also a reflection of where we are. We had some interesting views, so look forward to hearing from you, Mr. Sharma.
Thank you, Neil, and thank you for this opportunity. See, I have read somewhere that what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. So we are in a pandemic. We cannot deny that. So if we come out alive, definitely all of us will come out much more stronger, much more capable than what we were pre-pandemic. This is what I believe. We can have one kind of a commitment or one kind of an announcement with certainty. It is likely to happen. If you look at the last quarter's results also, whatever we have seen today, the Indian companies, they have managed this pandemic reasonably well. If you look at one line item, the employee expenses kind of a thing, you have noticed, and you must have taken note of this, is that the salary levels haven't come down as we used to hear from the market. So even in case of automobile companies, where there may have been zero sales in the month of April kind of a thing, the salary and wages levels have remained what they used to be. To the government employees, public sector employees, IT employees, if you look at huge number of employees based today, their jobs have remained reasonably protected. Of course, we will have hundreds of examples, because the whole body today, if it has got a small problem, it gets noticed, but the whole body keeps functioning. So in human life also, we have that issue. If you guys, if they lose jobs, if something, it's a deviation from the normal things happening, it gets observed, and rightfully it should get observed to see that it gets addressed also. So when we start about addressing the issue, Remember, I think we will have Rakesh also on board soon. Look at automobile sector, which Anuj also highlighted. Till 80s, who were the automobile manufacturers and what they used to do, both on two-wheelers and four-wheelers, right? India used to produce maybe 150,000 four-wheelers and maybe 500,000 two-wheelers. Now, Honda also does a beautiful thing. Hero itself sells more than 500,000 a month. And Maruti itself does more than 150 to 200,000 under normal circumstances, four-wheeler sales. More than half of the sales of Maruti comes from India. Hero, Bajaj Auto, Honda, they all are world-renowned manufacturers. And this happened because Maruti came in 80s, and we are seeing the benefits when automobile sector is going through tough times. The automobile companies are being able to manage their company's balance sheet beautifully. If you look at 90s, we had the problems of foreign exchange, and India had to pledge plain lots of gold to the Bank of England. Today you have $530 billion of foreign currency reserve, which can sustain significantly more than 1 year of import, and our rupee remains reasonably strong. If you look at Y2K transition to the IT soft power kind of a thing, today the most of the new jobs which have been created in 2000 onward sort of a thing, it is in the IT sector, which has become the backbone of, call it the back-ended offices of the global Fortune 500 companies, or call it the Indian IT engineering prowess, where they are being able to sustain and manage, where even during pandemic they have shown huge growth. If you look at 2010 as well, you will see that the banks had gone through with a huge NPA problem, and still we are going through with that kind of a situation. But here we have Manoj, who is telling that even in microfinance, right, where higher rate of interest is being charged, because of the social capital, under normal circumstances, you have 99% of recovery. So these are the positive signals, what I believe this pandemic, this COVID-19 also is going to provide to India, where a sector like ours, right, which in any case, in my view, was getting consolidated because RERA had come, because IBC had come, because GST ensures better transparency, because demonetization had happened, because the knowledge about the product, about the quality, about the requirement is significantly better. And on top of this, you would also notice that even in cases like the bankrupt companies who were not able to complete the projects in NCR, Noida, Gurgaon region, now customers are seeing, I'm not naming the companies, at the end of the day that they will get back their home. This is the beauty of India's, call it judicial system or call it an ecosystem, where sometimes justice definitely gets delayed and we can say justice got denied, but justice definitely gets delivered. So I become much more positive, and my data says that in the month of June and July, we have achieved almost normalcy with the good quantum of inquiry, good quantum of conversion, and good cash flow coming back, where even with the good amount of debt, right, we have not allowed our debt to go up in the last 4 months. And we have managed our operations beautifully. And
you mentioned, sorry, I wanted to check one more thing. You did mention about the interest rate transmission coming to you. You are looking at lower interest rates than you were in the past.
Of course, yes. Of course, yes. Both at the end of the customers as well as to the developers.
Absolutely.
Right.
It's a very interesting point. And I think as I heard Anuj, Mr. Sharma and Manojji, what it seems is that yes, we've got problems. We all know we've got problems, but I think it is not the end of the world. Things have sorted out. It is starting to get to close to normal, but a new normal. It will not be the same as we expected in the past. And at this stage, I want to pick up a question which just flashed up on the screen. Basically saying that, look, why are we slow in realizing when the pandemic came almost now 9 months ago in China, and then it was happening in Korea, and then within India it came to Kerala, Mumbai. At least my perspective was the first day when I came into lockdown, if somebody had told me, man, 1 year you'll have to stay like this, we would have all gone to a particular way. It was none of us in our lifetime had experienced this. So there was a natural transition for us to absorb because the future was not known. The interesting thing was both China and Kerala in a way got curtailed in a manner, and being intrinsically positive, all of us didn't believe it will happen to the scale it's happened today in a way. So I think, but I think one part of the question it says that we are experiencing now is depression. I at least from the three panelists didn't get that feeling that it's a sense of depression right now. Yes, there are some pockets where there are challenges. If you look at some of the positives for India, we've always said the rural economy, it's an agriculture-based economy. That sector is very hardly hit. It's kind of agriculture is booming. We're producing more than what we've ever produced in that context. I think let's look at the positive side. So let me ask a little human question to all my panelists. And this time, Kara, I'll start with Manoj, since you've given very small loans to lots of women, as you were explaining. So what are you seeing? Are you seeing a lot of despair on the ground, or are you seeing hope? And what can one do to make sure that hope remains?
Yeah, no, good question, Neil. See, what we are certainly seeing on the ground, and this is something that we've always believed for our sector, which is the resilience of the customer at the bottom of the pyramid is very high. Right? They are not people who are going to wait for somebody externally to come, whether it's the government or any other agency to come and help them. Right? We had something as severe as Cyclone Amphan, which hit Odisha and basically West Bengal. Can you believe the 3 districts in West Bengal which got severely impacted? Within a week to 10 days of that event happening, they were all back on their feet. Their small houses had been set back into order. Their small shops, whether they were selling tea, coffee, eateries, or small shops, had restarted. That's the resilience of the customers at that level. And like you rightly said, the agri connection has certainly helped because of the April harvest season, the sowing period which started after that, and again harvest which will come basically in September. Right, that's an important part of the activity which is bringing cash flow into the household. Right, so we clearly are not seeing people who have given up, or people who are saying everything is finished. Right, I think that is more of an urban phenomenon than I would say the semi-urban and the rural. The impact of COVID also has been far lesser, at least until recently, in the semi-urban and the rural area. With the migration which has happened, yes, you are seeing some amount of peaking of cases which has happened in the semi-urban and the rural areas in terms of in terms of transmission. But prior to that, they were actually going about their lives as normal, right? So to that extent, they were fairly insulated. So what we are seeing on the ground, and if I am reporting 60, 70, 80% kind of collections, it obviously means there is money due to which they're able to pay. Otherwise, how will they pay? Right? So the agri connection, the fact that the livelihoods were lesser impacted, all of that is helping. And today, as I'm saying, as India opens up, right, all of them at the bottom of the pyramid are actually looking towards rebuilding their lives, getting back to their normalcy, which might take 2 months, 3 months, 4 months, 6 months, depending on the kind of damage which has happened. But they're all looking forward to life, right? So that I think is the single biggest feature there, that people don't give up.
Taking what you from there, I think, Anuj, if I was to ask you for a kind of a not the bottom of the pyramid, because we need hope and we need the positivity at the say an average middle class, what would be your message to them, or what are you in terms of how does one look for hope and positivity in a time like this?
Yeah, I think the one thing, if you look at the construct of our economy, right? I mean, today the India's economy construct is very different from the rest of the world. Today, 65% is basically the consumption driven, right? So our dependency on the export is very less. And the other, the positive which I see is the service is the least impacted, right? I mean, pretty much the export of services you can manage digitally, remotely, and we were well structured for that. I think these two factors put together, I think, will give a lot of hope, because the amount of impact on the people in the 6 to 9 months time horizon would be very minimal. As I think someone said in the beginning, that the IT sector has not been impacted a lot, which is true. In fact, if you look at the tech companies, they are gaining a lot. Today, the profitability of the tech company has gone through the roof. So they will stand to gain for sure. I think so. That, and as I said, I think India's consumption still remains intact. So what happens to the Europe or US is least of concern for India, because we have very, let's say, little dependency compared to China, if I have to do the comparison with China. So, and I think the third thing, if you look at Manrega, right, the jobs which are being sought and the jobs which are being provided through Manrega is almost 65% up. So I think, again, which also is a very strong indicator that people want to go back to the normal life. They are seeking employment. They are being provided employment. And the fourth factor, which again very specific to, let's say, my current company, we have seen the footfall in the retail right now, especially I think I'm now talking about the eyeglass. We are seeing almost 65 to 70% of pre-COVID, which is again another indicator that I think people want to get back to the normal life. So I would see, as I think Manoj and Mr. Sharma said earlier, I would see there is a strong hope, very little to be concerned about. But of course, I think in the short term, 3, 4, 5 months time period has been, last couple of months have been difficult. Next 2, 3 months will remain difficult, but we will have a much, let's say, sharper recovery, like the V-shape. Once the event is over, right? For us, it is very difficult to say right now. We are not still seeing a complete V-shape, because for us, India has been behind the curve compared to some of the other countries. So the event for us is not over. Once we get through the event, once we have stability in terms of the COVID cases, I think we would see the much sharper recovery for the reasons I mentioned. I think those are the things which should give hope to all of us, as well as the average citizen.
Thanks, Anuj. I think one point which you spoke about was Manrega and labor, and we all very distinctly remember those gloomy pictures of those migrant workers walking for thousands of miles and all the challenges that we saw. Hopefully, some of them has been dealt with. I'll move to you, Mr. Sharma, on this. Are we on this whole labor issue?
Hello.
On the whole labor issue,
बस बढ़िया अभी चल रहा है अभी तक
sorry, I think you have to just mute. Yeah, okay. On the whole labor issue, Mr. Sharma, are we seeing the problem at both ends being sorted out? First, people are getting jobs who are wanting to come back, and are companies getting workmen when they want? Because this problem was being seen at both ends. And then, Mr. Sharma, as you are one of the large employers for your sector, what are you feeling? In Bangalore saw a large migration happening.
It's a very, very important question. We also were taken aback the way the labor started moving out when the lockdown was getting lifted, and we needed them the most, because prior to that, for about a couple of months, you have taken care of their interest, and we believe that going back was not even a solution for them, but it had happened. There are multiple theories, multiple reasons, but it did take place, and it had impacted the production in the last quarter significantly in the construction sector. But fortunately, you have started seeing that these laborers, they have started sending the signals back, and they are coming back. We have provided them the transport, the buses, the required means. We are putting them under quarantine, and by the end of July, we believe that almost 30 to 40% of the people who had gone back, they have come back in a place like Bangalore. In other cities also, this kind of a migration back to the work is being seen. And I don't think this will be an issue we'll be talking about couple of months from now. Those who are needing the job, they definitely will be able to get back to their previous employers as far as the real estate sector, construction sector is concerned.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. There's a question on the board as well in terms of the whole issue of corruption becoming a major hurdle, and how can technology and transparency attempt to change that at the government end. And this is something which I have kind of passionately worked for years and decades, I must say. And I'll actually paint a dual picture on that. I can talk about 2 or 3 programs which I've personally worked on, and where technology used in the right way has completely transformed a major problem which we had. And I'll take long examples so that we can see the picture happening. Say passport. Many of us in our childhood would have gone in to take a passport, how it would happen. You would stand in queue, middle of the night, people would go, be there for hours, there are touts outside, how it works. And how beautifully a good design program, I had the privilege of working on that for a long time, to see how does using the right technology, doing the right process, it changed. Similarly, if you look at income tax returns, we were all probably on this call would have filed for income tax returns. I'm particularly talking about the personal returns. The interface itself has gone away. We can go online and file our returns, the refunds come back home. Earlier, the avatar of even the guy who got a refund back, the guy would say, "Paisa do," only the envelope will come to you and the check inside will not come. We've all seen examples of that. Similarly, on numerous areas, we are seeing technology being used in a manner that you can delineate the kind of power at the hand of the officer to do discretion. Both of these cases, this is exactly what happened. I can give you another one. Land records, an area which impacts our rural people. Earlier, people to get a copy of the record of right, as it's called, it was a huge affair. There was only one man called the Patwari who knew what your land record was, and only if you reached him, your relevant Patwari, you would get a copy of your record of right. And lots of miseries that happened, as misery story, which has changed. Is that complete? No way. There are hundreds of such areas where it needs to be done. Some effort is on. So I think, which is where a pull and pressure back from society as well. How does one drive? How does one demand something like this happens? Becomes very important. Then I think, Manoj, if I come back to you as well, and I think one question which is there also on the panel in terms of very high interest rates, how it used to happen in the past. And when we were chatting, you spoke about the whole ethical lending aspect and how that ethical lending code is being put out. Do you want to very briefly speak about it? I can see we are kind of getting short on time. So we'll probably keep our answers crisper.
No, I certainly want to respond on that, because I also heard Sharma ji talk about very high interest rates that we charge.
Yeah,
so let me give you all a context. For a 100 rupee loan that you take from an MFI today, which is licensed by the RBI, you would end up paying 10 to 12 rupees as the range of interest for the whole year. Right? So because we all charge about 20 to 24% reducing balance. So on a 100 rupee loan, you would essentially pay 10 to 12 rupees for the whole year. And just to put that in context, the same customer, if he or she were to take that money from a money lender, would pay that same amount per month. So essentially, we are 1/12 or 1/10 of what gets charged by private sort of money lenders. So just to put that in context, Neil, being regulated by the RBI essentially means that customer protection and the guidelines under which you have to work, because you're dealing with a very sensitive constituency of clients who are actually vulnerable because of the illiteracy at that kind of level, and the fact that most of them would not understand the numbers. The guidelines by the RBI are very clear. In fact, I would go to the extent of saying that the NBFC MFI industry today in India is the most regulated type of institution in the country. Our ticket sizes are regulated, our interest rates are regulated, our tenures are regulated, the maximum indebtedness that you can commit to a customer is regulated. Even the number of lenders who can deal with a client is regulated. To the extent that after 10 years now we are going back to the RBI and saying it's time to relook at these norms which have existed for 10 years. Please allow us some freedom so that we can actually look at the next 10 years. Right? So in terms of ethical lending, Neil, because of these conditions and the fact that there are very strict RBI guidelines to follow, most of us are by force ensured that you have to sort of subscribe to a certain common minimum program under which you work. The code for responsible lending that I was talking to you yesterday is something where the different types of institutions who do microfinance lending have come together to ensure that there is a common minimum program on which we all operate, whether it's banks or non-banks, right? And most of us, Neil, actually subject ourselves to scrutiny through the social performance measurement assessment, through smart campaign principles, so that our commitment to that particular aspect in terms of being transparent is actually checked by an external agency and certified. So we are probably one of the few types of institutions where we undergo a social performance management certification to ensure that are you giving English terms and conditions to somebody who can't even read? Are you making a customer sign on documents which you don't even explain? So all the documents have to be simple. They have to be in the local language. They have to be read out to customers so that she understands what. And do you know that any customer who takes a loan from our sector goes through at least 3 financial literacy sessions, 2 of them done by the loan officer and 1 of them done by the branch head, to explain what is interest, what is meant by joint liability group, what is the credit bureau, what is the insurance coverage that you're taking, so that everything is understood by the customer, whether in writing or in terms of oral communication.
That's lovely. I think we have a very interesting question. I think this aspect which we had not touched at all. In terms of startups and what's kind of the challenge which the startups are facing, the money is drying down, the market. I think the resilience in some of them was lower. Well, rightly, one would expect. And what would and the question, as it says, the panelists are very optimistic for rapid recovery. What happens to the plight of the startup ecosystem? At least I'll have a very quick take and then invite anyone from the panel who wants to say something. See, what it is, one of my analysis of the pandemic was, what it did was, any challenge or risk which existed in the pre-pandemic days suddenly got magnified hundreds of thousands of times. So things which could have gone wrong at some point in time because there was an equilibrium, there was a risk which existed, all of those came by. So something which could have happened 5 years later, 10 years later, everything got tested in a very short period of time. I think that's the unfortunate part on this. I think it is a real challenge to that extent, especially around startups who were in sectors which have got very badly impacted. We've also the travel trade type startups have got very severely impacted. Although I've started to see in sectors where there's interest, the startups continue to get funded, new startups continue to get funded, especially say, for instance, healthcare. I think the number of startups I see are coming up in a very big way. Financial inclusion, the whole digital payment space, I think the numbers which are coming around there are only growing, and the lending may not have stopped there. Yes, some of the food delivery, and some of those have had to reinvent themselves. Many of them have moved to a more uh, grocery delivery type something. So yes, there is a churn there happening, which may have taken 3 years, is happening in 3 months. So I don't know if any of you have anything to add. And thereafter, Deepak, I don't know how are we doing on time. So is it time to wrap up and hand it back to you, or we have more time?
You have about another 15-20 minutes more to go, Neil. So
Okay.
we all enjoy
Okay.
the conversation. It's coming out beautifully. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So in that case, back to you, anyone in the panel, including you, Deepak, if you had any views on.
No, I think on startups, if I were a startup person today, I would really need to relook at my business model. I really need to look at the capital that I'm carrying. I really need to look in what stage of evolution is my organization, right? Because as you rightly said, what this has really done is to ensure that any inefficiency which is there in the system will not be tolerated. So the cost of investment towards building or something of scale, which then becomes viable, that particular journey, if you are caught on the wrong end of that particular journey, then obviously you will go through stress. But my sincere advice to people like that would be, you need to reassess the capital that you have. You should not really sort of worry too much about valuations right now. Get money, because money is the most important thing, which will ensure that you survive. Growth, valuation, and all that will come after you survive.
If I may add to what Manoj said, I've been pretty active in this space, Neil, with more than around 12 investments. So I think the couple of trends which I've personally been observing over the last 2 or 3 months, I think there is definitely some degree of the survival of the fittest is definitely going to happen. Gone are the old days with the frothy valuation of, you start a startup and within a matter of, 12, 15 months, you get to a unicorn and 1 billion plus valuation. I think those are the days which are, it's for them, for that sort of scenario, this is a difficult situation. However, I think the quality startups, they have shown a lot of resilience. And to give you a couple of examples for a couple of my portfolio companies who are into the sports, how beautifully they transitioned from traditional, the swimming and badminton kind of facilities. They started collaboration with the societies for the yoga classes. And in terms of their revenue, within a matter of, the 3 or 4 months, they're back to, let's say, the earlier the revenue scenario. So they have shown the good startups, which are run by strong founding teams, they have shown a lot of resilience. Now, in terms of the fundraising, the good startups are not struggling with in terms of the raising money at all. And I have seen a lot of startups with the moment they present to the investors, within matter of few minutes, they get the funding that they are looking for. So there is enough money for the strong ideas backed by the good founding teams. But however, I think not each and every startup will get the money in the current scenario, as Manoj said. That's where the filtration is going to be higher. But I think as if you are convinced about your idea and if you show the resilience, again, I think making the same point again, I think you will get money. You will not. You may have difficulties in the short run, have difficulties in the mid to long run.
Thanks, Amjad. I think that's a very important point you made. If you have the business model intact, or if you are able to innovate the business model, in fact, money available is far more than it ever was. Absolutely. Every person who's got money, whether at the private equity end, to a venture capitalist, to whatever end, or to a large bank, or to an HNI investor, which Anuj very aptly explained he was. So what comes out is everybody's got far more money because of what RBI and all the global ecosystems are doing. If you are able to, if I was a startup, if I was able to make sure that I was riding the wave of innovation, and I think one of the things that you said is if you don't change fast enough, you'll be dead in a startup anyway. So if you've changed to that, it will solve for that. Okay, I think there's another very interesting question. A part of that, Nambiar, I'll get to you. In terms of what kind of businesses do MFIs lend to? I think the feeling here is it's only to agri. But when I was speaking to yesterday and what I've seen otherwise, it is probably far, far more beyond. You want to give us 10 examples of people you've lent to which are not agri?
Right. No, no, I just want to clarify that our business actually is to 99% female customers. And these are people, money is not given to start a business, but money is given essentially to scale up and grow that business. These are really people at the bottom of the pyramid. So essentially a tea stall that you see on a road, or a small grocery shop, or a small vegetable stall that somebody is running. Those are the kind of businesses that we lend to, right? Livelihood, sort of generating, income generating kind of businesses. So, and the loan sizes itself will explain to you the kind of businesses that we actually fund. The loan sizes vary anywhere from 10,000 rupees, and the overall indebtedness can go right up to about 1 lakh. But essentially an average ticket size is roughly about 35,000 rupees. And the average outstanding would be roughly about that. So these are businesses which are really essential services at the bottom of the pyramid, the ones that you will see when you're walking around a city or a small district sort of headquarters or a village, right? Not really very organized business entities, right? So that's not our segment.
I think the second part of the question, I think Arup has asked, that is about skilling and kind of how unemployed youth and how that correlation and what can government do. So I'll wear my government hat and try and say that. See, there have been a lot of programs around the whole NSDC, the ministry which is responsible for skilling. But crores of people have been formally skilled, if I may use that word. In every sector, probably a lot of program has been done. So last, I think, 10 years, I would say 10 to 15 years, a lot of effort has gone. But I think, is the full benefit of that effort coming? Possibly no. Because there has been, although a huge amount of efforts again have been made there, but the full correlation between who to skill and when to skill and what to skill. All these three questions we say, because of the size, complexity, and other challenges, these have not always been at the perfect level. A little hope here. I would urge you to kind of, there's a new program about which the Prime Minister's office and Amitabh Kant and many others have recently tweeted. I've been actually involved with that also. It's called Unnati. Government is trying to, if you type that, I'm sure you'll see some, very few little, but it's in the infancy. An attempt is being made to solve for this. So it's a labor exchange where kind of 20 crore workmen can come in at one end. All the job providers, like replacing pretty much our labor chalk and stuff like that in a very simple technology way. Again, going back to an earlier question around how can technology change our lives and reduce corruption. And at the third end would be get the skill. So if you can, never in the past, anybody had attempted to do it at a large scale. So if 20 crore people can put their job needs and employers can come in at the other end, and wherever the gap is, skilling can be provided to that. I think that's an effort being made. Hopefully it will succeed. It's very aggressive timeline. Arup, I'd urge you to follow that program, and with anything such large, wish as well that it goes on. All right, the Prime Minister himself is very, very keen that this succeeds as well. Okay, so with that, I don't see any more questions here, but I can come back to you, Anuj. Yesterday when I was speaking to you, spoke about a very interesting context around perseverance and confidence as two things which India and we as Indians need in times like this. Do you want to elaborate on that any further?
Yeah, I think it's also okay. I've been with a couple of large organizations over the last 15 years or so. I think every time an outsider would see India as 1.3 billion population, the large market, but once you start going deep, and there is a little bit of disappointment. And I think G's previous CEO, Jack Welch, used to say, I think from the outside world, India is a fantastic market, huge opportunity. But there is some degree of disappointment because I think India has not really done justice to its potential yet. And then I think during my experience, I was just trying to find out what was something, within G world, what China was doing, what India was not doing. I think the China, even 15 years back, was the Chinese team was extremely aspirational. You tell them that how would you do it? I think they will give you confidence. Okay, we are going to accomplish a revenue of 1 billion. They may end up doing from 300 million to they will end up going to 600, 700 million in the end. But still, it's a much better solution. But if you tell India, if you are at 300 million, we'll say, okay, we'll grow by 10%, we will reach 330. So I think that the multifold jump, the aspiration that let's say some of the Chinese teams used to have, India used to lack. We always wanted to play a little bit safe and be a little bit more conservative. I think that was the one thing which I personally thought, which worked quite well for our Chinese business. And I think they had pretty strong the aspiration and as well as the perseverance. The same applies even in my, let's say, the current organizational context. When we had to, set up the plant in 2012, we were looking at, just to give you an idea of per day lengths of somewhere around 8,000, and where China had somewhere around 25,000. But even for 8,000, we were very scared, right? Whether will we ever be able to get to that level? So this is 2012-13. It took us a little bit of time. How are we going to improve our quality? How will we even get to the quality standards that, let's say, the German company looks for? I think that took us quite a bit of time to build the confidence of our people. Actually, our engineering can be as good as German engineering.
I actually want to come in here, Anuj. I really like that part, that how does India gets really aspirational. So what we're hearing is that we may not be as aspirational. And Mr. Sharma, we've seen your company kind of grow quite significantly as well. So any guidance from your side as to how do we as Indians become really aspirational?
See, it's a good point. We need to be aspirational. At the same time, I do believe that it's somewhere a confluence of the government policies. So if you try to
do we blame the government on everything?
No,
Sorry.
No,
Are we aspirational enough on our own?
No, not that way. Not that way. But you will see that how billions and billions of rupees, right, get invested, and thereafter some NGT order, some environmental issues, some governmental challenges in the courts, it puts paid to those kind of an investments. So I am saying that it is good to be aspirational, but at the same time, if you look at this, governmental policies have definitely hurt from the point of view of growing it the way it should grow. The other way of looking into, we may be a nation of intelligent people, capable people, but our attitude.
I want to actually change the narrative here. Sorry. So, are we aspirational enough? Are we, each of our businesses which we run, and I'll kind of invite Manoj as well at this point. We've got to 60 million people, as you said, for giving loans, touching almost 30 crore people. How do we be even more aspirational? How do we make sure that not one person is left behind? A lot is being done. We can always, yes, there is a double side. We've got a million problems because of which, yet we've seen companies which have kind of moved ahead, or individuals which have moved ahead. How does that become a norm, as I think Anuj was also saying? Or and can something be done for us to be break away and be even more aspirational?
No, I think Neilji, two things. One is, I think taking away from what both my colleagues were talking earlier. Somewhere, I think in the Indian context, while the technical or the hypothetical demand is there and the market is huge, like like Anuj rightly said, when you delayer that and see what is the section that you can really address, what is addressable, and what is that segment which can pay for that service or product that you can actually give, then you get into something very, very sort of distinct and concrete. One. Second is like Mr. Sharma said, probably the experience of seeing the past where you've taken 2 steps forward and taken 3 steps backward, right? Essentially, then conditions our mind into saying, yes, theoretical potential is so much, but let me be realistic by saying 100 so that I can do 110 and show that I've
Yeah,
overachieved.
that is like, yes, there are lots of sides. I think we have enough and more examples why it's not happening. Why did it take a TikTok to come in and get such a success in India? We were
No,
the
so
technology powerhouse of the world.
But we
no,
have some
It wasn't
example
because
like
we were not
exactly.
aspirational.
I think
Sorry.
if you look
No,
at the payment system that we have, if you look at Aadhaar that we have created, these are global
Oyo.
world-class examples.
absolutely. I was going to come to that. So why are we
Yeah.
not saying how do we create a UPI which is the global best? Why do we not create a more of Aadhaar, which is again the global best? And I've worked with both of them in their infancy and creation. How do we do these what are called platform scale revolutions, which can move things much faster? Because
No, but
I mean, look
let
at
me
all the
ask you,
implementation.
Neil. Let me ask you, Neil, that for any startup that you're talking today, where does that seed capital come from? The seed capital comes from the entrepreneur, whatever little he can manage. The
Yeah.
rest of the money is always coming from outside India. Are you trying to say that there is no money here? There is no, it is only now that you see family offices, HNIs, who have exited, let's say, from their investments, who have money to invest, who are investing. Otherwise,
Yeah.
even in my sector, right, the money always used to come from out. It was foreign investment. So at the end of the day, when your own country doesn't believe in your startup idea and invest, or you are so hung up on valuations that you don't want to give that extra
Okay, money
interface
may
to
come
that
from wherever.
entrepreneur.
Is the innovator from India or not? I think that's the core question. I think Anuj, you were trying to add to this debate as well. I think this is a
Yeah.
raw nerve I've hit somewhere. So sorry, Anuj.
I think you need some success stories, right? I think, let's say the Flipkart is a classic example of becoming one of the success stories. Oyo is another. Now, maybe not the right time to talk about Oyo, but I think they were, quite bold. They opened operations in China, Japan, Australia,
US.
UK. Then was another case of Ola as well, right? So I think once you have some success stories, that has a compounding
Don't we
effect.
have enough of
And
them already? Anuj, don't we
we
have enough
have
of them already?
now we have started getting, right? How old is the Flipkart story? It's maybe a matter of couple of years, right? So you will also see the trend is changing over the last 2 or 3 years. Now people have started getting confidence. We also had the social stigma, right? The failure in the culture was not really acceptable. Now this is far more acceptable. Now people look at it. Have you had any failure, and how did you handle or manage that failure? What did you learn from that? Now that entire narrative has completely changed. So now I think with the changing, this is like an evolution, right? I mean, with some success stories, I'm sure I think this will go down to the next level as well. But we have a long way to go. It's just that I think we need to learn how to do we celebrate those successes and make use of those successes to sort of share those learnings with the next level. I think those are some of the things we still, from the cultural point of view, we need to learn. I think this will come. It's a matter of time. I would say, we have started moving in that direction. This should come through. But as I said, I think at the same time, more of us should be willing to accept the failure which has started happening in the country. More and more of that will definitely help the economy in the country.
That's, I think, very well said. So there is hope in this area as well. I think, Manoj, you started talking about UPI and our payment system and digital payment. But do you want to go a little deeper on that, and why do we believe India has done very best there?
You just look at the scale and size. The number of transactions which the, let's say, the payment system today handles, right? Even in terms of your NEFT and your RTGS today, it is 24/7, 365. There are other countries who are actually coming here and saying, please, can you come and help us set that, set it up there, right? So to that extent, the volume of transactions and the robustness of the system, where through IMPS you can ensure that the money hits the bank account of the other person in a matter of minutes, right? Where else can you get that sort of efficiency?
Yeah,
And even in
I
terms
wanted
of
to give.
Aadhaar, 1.3 billion citizens being covered, right? With a unique ID, which till today at least people do appreciate that it is completely authentic and it is very difficult to duplicate or create a fraud on. Whereas voters ID, PAN cards, and all that, you have so many floating around, right? So these are two examples where the conceptualization has been perfect. The thought process in terms of using the right technology, investing rightly in terms of infrastructure, getting it implemented to the last mile, because we start a lot of things, but eventually do all of them reach that level of, in terms of scale and size that you had originally thought through. And if India can do it well, then it is something which can be replicated across the world.
Absolutely. So I think I'd want to give two examples on this further as well. So, say payment systems. Australia today, one of the most developed countries in the world, and whatever. If you are trying to make a payment there, say a hotel payment, they would typically charge somewhere between 1 to 2.5% as an extra fee on the person who's paying. Try booking a hotel in Australia and try paying them money online. 1 to 2.5% is the extra charge. Many other countries similarly, either the charge may come to me as the customer or to the merchant. Typically, it's the whole debit card to credit card may have come down, but globally somewhere between 0.5 to 2.5% is the global average. What has UPI done? Brought that down to kind of few cents, maybe 1 cent or lower than that, and practically free. The Paytm revolution has come. One. And second is the value of transaction. Very rare would you get people paying 10 rupees, 5 rupees, 20 rupees on the digital pay. So I think that's another one. I wanted to give another example of what, because of Aadhaar and how the whole online authentication, KYC started to happen. So my son recently migrated to the UK, and I was chatting with him the other day. He says to apply for a driver's license in the UK, after you fill up some form, you have to sign a piece of paper, put your passport in that, and courier it to a place. That's the only way of authentication that they allowed. Or put it into the mailbox. Yes, the mailing system is very good. You have to, but he was so dreading. Why can't I do it online? Or how the hell do I put my passport in an envelope and put it inside the mailbox? You would kind of dread to do that. But that's, I think, so in many aspects, as a country, we have evolved. And I think both these platform systems in Aadhaar and UPI, a lot of fundamental shift has happened on which, again, I think on your microcredit, you are having the Aadhaar platform allows you to kind of do services at a fraction of a cost. So let me ask you a question. What is the typical cost of carrying out a transaction fee? And what if you did not have an Aadhaar and other online mechanisms, how would have that cost changed? Mr. Nambiar, again, back to you on this.
Oh, very true. See, unfortunately, Aadhaar has got into a little bit of an issue as far as we are concerned, because Aadhaar is allowed for eKYC only for government departments, and you can't store the number. It has to be masked and all of that. And even eKYC is today restricted only to banks. Non-banks are not allowed.
Okay.
So we've actually, as an industry, we took a momentous decision in 2015 to move into Aadhaar and say, if you don't have an Aadhaar card, you can't get an MFI loan, right? And gradually, depending on the penetration of Aadhaar in different states, we moved towards that. And we had to completely withdraw after the privacy judgment came out. But in terms of payment systems, on the UPI, what the RBI has done is up to 2,000 rupees payment, mostly these are the kind of payments which happen when the repayment happens, is completely free. There is no charge. So the idea here is to make the customer use it, make the customer bank so that the money is left in the bank so that you can do these transactions and there is no charge. Because one thing which was actually coming up in the middle is that who will pay that charge, right? And because we
if
are
it was to be collected in cash versus this, what's the variation in the benefit to you?
Well, huge benefit. So insurance premium that we pay on fidelity, fire theft and burglary, when so much amount of cash is being carried around, the risk that you are running in terms of the loan officer carrying lakhs of rupees on his backpack and coming back to the branch, and then from the branch taking it to the bank branch, the time which is actually lost, if we can put that into productive activity, it more than pays for itself.
Absolutely. So Deepak, we're almost getting to the half-hour mark. Should I hand it back to you now at this stage?
But there's a one question which is arising to my mind, and I don't know why we didn't really touch upon that. And I just feel that what is also wrong while we're talking about this economic revival, and one of the challenges today we're facing is job market. We need jobs for the youngsters. We need the job for the generations coming in. Is there anything wrong in encouraging the public and private sectors, both to do a early retirement so that the more jobs can get filled in? Is that something which has been spoken about or been thought about in the industry? I mean, just a very quick view. It would be very interesting to hear everyone's view.
I think, Deepak, there are enough jobs available even without people like me retiring. So there's nothing to worry. Right? I mean, let me tell you, in my own industry, we employ more than 1 lakh employees. And the issue there is that the attrition rate that we are seeing at the front line is about 40 to 50%. So the issue really in the Indian context is not about people. It's about when you find that person, you train that person, right? The person wants to move on. There is nothing called loyalty. There is nothing called some gratitude for the training that you've got, that at least X amount of months or years you work before you move on, right? And this is what is really creating the issue. And in terms of productivity, so once you've recruited somebody as a fresher, you've inducted him, you've given him the training, you put him on the job, right? The attitude towards work is, where can I get a very easy job where I can sit in an AC environment, right? I have not to take any pressure. So the kind of jobs which exist in our sector are really very rigorous, right? The loan officer has to cover a catchment area of about 15-20 kilometers on his bike. He has to get up early in the morning. The first center meeting starts at 8 o'clock in the morning, and he has to literally work till 6 or 7 in the evening, right? So people want easy situation. There's no dearth of employment. I'm sure whether you talk to Mr. Sharma on the realty sector or Anuj on the other businesses which are there, we all need people.
Interesting.
See, I'll tell you one more data point on this, Deepak. For us, the kind of population demographics we are in, even if you had to retire everybody from 55 to 60, the number of jobs it will create will not be anyway enough on that. And I wanted to talk about another point which you mentioned, Manoj, in terms of the whole ethics of that. There's a program, I think, which we've been thinking of, and we'll probably see instances of that coming in the Unnati thing, which I spoke about earlier. Is that, look, how do we build trust in the whole employer and employee in the long run? So let me explain what I mean here. So say, for instance, anybody from Delhi here, although I think it's largely a Bangalore crowd on the panel, we never trusted a taxi ever. Anybody in Delhi getting a black and yellow, if you had to get into that any morning, was the most dreadful thing you would think of, and how would that journey end? What did Uber do? It created a completely different level of trust between the rider and the cab driver. By rating both, by doing that, I think somewhere both of them, in a very interesting way, we could build a a social reason or a kind of an emotional reason to change. That has not happened in the job market at all in the past. We tried to solve it only by saying और skill देते हैं इसको तो better हो जाएगा और पैसे देते हैं तो रुक जाएगा. Let's provide in some more facility because of which it will leave. But that connect and the employer and the problems at the employer end as well. So possibly one at least one solution which I think if it could change, if there could be a way that we link kind of rating, performance, trust at both the ends to drive that reform. Sorry, Deepak, it was your time. We kind of started to hug back.
Good. No, it was interesting. And in fact, in this entire conversation, it was such an intelligent conversation today, Neil, I must tell you that. But there's something which you brought up and you said, are the startups or the people aspirational? And Manoj said, where is the money? Even if they're aspirational and they want to do something, where is the money? And I think it just brought in some thoughts in my mind. And I said, listen, you wanted a liquid soap during this COVID time, and you went down to China to pick up that COVID, that liquid soap. You wanted the doctors wanted a suit to protect themselves. They went to China to bloody buy that. And you look at the scenario. The raw material is here in India. It goes across to China, and then it comes back to India. Is this a question of aspiration, or is this a question of monies? Or is it a question of regulatory bodies or the government which says, hey, these are the things which should be done here in India. Government is ready to back it. Come, let's make this happen. We keep talking about make in India, but are we really making in India? Is a question which keeps crossing my mind. And I think, and I'm glad that we had some diverse views today of everybody on this issue. And Mr. Sharma also pointed out, government is not a body which needs to stop the progress. You have a environment challenges, these challenges, that challenge, fine. Fix up a regulatory front. Let the industry work around that. But let the government create opportunities, provide monies, provide infrastructure to make those things happen, what Manoj pointed out. So just a small viewpoint on that.
But on that example that you gave, Deepak, let's also understand that while that was true before when the pandemic just started, right? You are aware of the kind of PPE kits and the other stuff which is being made here today, and hopefully the vaccine also will probably come from here. At least it will get manufactured here for sure.
Hope so. But gentlemen, I think outstanding conversation. Neil moderated beautifully. I mean, it's such I won't say moderation, it was a great conversation. So very nicely done. Mr. Sharma, Manoj, Anuj, very insightful. I really enjoyed every moment of the conversation today. And as I said in the beginning of my spill that CEO Lounge is just not about knowledge. It is also about knowing the leaders on the other side. And all of you have huge fan followers who want to become like you and also want to know what's happening in your life otherwise, and probably we'll spend about 5 minutes in knowing and understanding that. And maybe I could start with Mr. Sharma because he's been quiet for a while. And, my first thought process, 2 decades building up a great real estate world, you actually enhancing the lives of people. You want to make sure that they live in the most beautiful place, most comfortable place. What are those 3 things that you personally feel are really needed in terms of the comfort and experience while you're choosing a home, sir?
See, it's a good point, Deepak. Basically, what we believe, right, as an organization, the design part, correct, both of the business as well as of the product, it does play a very important role. Until unless you do not get some kind of a hold and understand and appreciate the importance of the design aspect of your business and the design aspect of your product, you will not be able to come up to the level where you have come up. So I think every organization today must have a point of view from the design perspective, sort of a thing, right? The number 2, according to me, should be the basic integrity. We operate in an environment where the trust factor is very low. Why RERA today? Right, primarily because somewhere we had failed our customers after having taken the money and not delivered the products. So I think that the second part should be that you need to understand that there has to be a basic integrity in India while doing the business, and it applies across the board. And that's where, in my view, the power of the government has to play in a positive manner, not in a negative manner, not in a selective manner kind of a thing, but it will become another discussion at some point of a time sort of a thing. Third most important thing we did talk about, from Manoj to taking money for the startups part, you need capital, quality capital you need. Not the capital at a high cost or in the form of preferential equity sort of a thing. Because any business to be nurtured initially, it requires a reasonable quantum of capital to sustain itself and reach to that critical mass. So if you have a control over the design part, if you have got a hang over that intent, the integrity part, and if you also inject, in my view, a right kind of capital where you are not today dependent on that capital to take the decision. So the business decision need not be dependent on that capital kind of a thing. If we can address these three issues, India is going to be a huge, huge, huge market. And trust me, that is what I was telling in the beginning. We can always look at the past and can extrapolate all the negative things to say things will magnify. No. The view is that we are entering into an era where all these things have been addressed. Somewhere Neil was talking about on the IT point. Today, it is not only filing the return, it is not only a right scrutiny part, it is that a faceless interaction where the people are not afraid of filing their income tax and getting the money without being harassed. Passport was another example kind of a thing. And similarly, in our industry also, the way the BBMP has come out from August onwards to have everything online application, we are moving in the right direction, but we need to show little bit of urgency because world is moving far faster than us, and these kind of a pandemics must spur the authorities and us both together to see that we walk at a pace. If we have to compete with China to become a global leader, both in consumption as well as in investment, and to take care of that employment issues for the 65% of our population who are below 35.
Excellent. So I think we got a great answer that if you have to buy your dream house, and these are the three things that's extremely important. So thank you, Mr. Sharma, for that. Manoj, I'm fascinated with the glow on your face. I think it's really infectious. And I really would like to know what is your exercise schedule that you really follow to make sure that this charm really comes up at this age as well.
Frankly, being in a lockdown situation, there is nothing much that you can do except work from home and being on the laptop for a long time. But I think it's just eating right, being positive, and always. I think if you look at issues and obstacles as to how to solve them and overcome them and move forward, right? I've always believed that it's very easy to say, oh, isme problem hai, usme problem hai. ठीक है. You are there because you are supposed to be the solver of the problem, right? If you are occupying such levels, such positions, whether as CEO of a company or in terms of let's say an association of the sector, you have to really do justice to the position that you occupy. And if you cannot contribute, then you should get out.
So being right?
and probably at my age, just to add, probably at my age, we are trying to prove to ourselves that we are still worthwhile and we still need to go on.
Relevant.
You definitely are, sir. But being a Calcutta boy, is it football or is it cricket?
No, I'm not Calcutta boy. I'm actually from Bombay. So our group is from Bombay. The company that I lead is actually sort of registered out of Calcutta.
Okay, I thought you live in Calcutta, sir. But is it football or is it cricket for you, sir?
Oh, cricket, mostly cricket, not that much football.
Great. So Anuj, while you're busy packing for Germany and thereafter to New York, what are the things that you're going to really be missing here in India? Let's.
I think the couple of things which definitely come to my mind is first is the passion that people have in India is extremely high, right? So the passion, you give them a task, right? They will do it with a complete passion. I don't think the same amount of passion exists in the Western world. Yeah, that's the one thing which I personally find is going to be a challenge. And I think, of course, on the personal side, I think who doesn't love the Indian food, right? That's something you don't find the same quality anywhere else. Yeah, so that I think these are the two things for sure which are gonna stay in my mind.
You're not going to be missing some cricket in Germany and New York?
That I think with all digital advancement, right? I mean, that's not something you will miss. You will have the access to the digital content anywhere in the world.
Good. Neil, I've read something which made me really proud about you, and that incident that happened on the Indigo flight, and a label of PwC which you're so very proud of. I think that's that's a that's something which I would love to hear from you. I think we all would love to hear that, Neil. Very touching, and I think it would be a very appropriate closure to today's conversation. So maybe you can spend a couple of minutes in talking about that incident.
Okay, so you got some really old memories back. I think it's good 6-7 years back. So I think I need to step back a bit. So I've been at PwC about 88 is when I joined. So lots of years in PwC, 32, 33 years. And a typical lifestyle, at least 3 or 4 day trips every week. Take a flight in the morning, come back at night, and be ready for next morning to go somewhere else, and so on and so forth. And this was a early morning flight which I took. I was flying from Delhi to Hyderabad. I had some very important meetings at the other end of the government, and I kind of woke up early, got into the flight. About half an hour into the flight, started feeling very uneasy and kind of cutting the long story short there, breathless and etc. And suddenly the air hostess and a doctor on board, and I could hear the doctor say the pulse is really falling and this and that. So some scary moments. And the captain decided we need to land in between unscheduled stop. Flight landed unscheduled in between in Nagpur and kind of offloaded me. Suddenly there were ambulances, this, that. But I think one thing which I suddenly realized that they were, so when I was being offloaded, I had my carry-on bag on top, and which had a PwC label on it. Maybe had the PwC tag on it. And then somebody whom I didn't know, a large organization, who saw that tag, and he tried to offload simultaneously as well, but obviously could not be done because he was not related. He didn't even probably know my name or whatever, but etc. So again, long story short, before the flight took back again, he called a few people, and obviously my phone was off by the time. I could not have switched on and whatever. And by the time I got to the hospital, my family knew, some other people knew. We do a lot of work in the government of Maharashtra and whatever it is as well. The district administration knew, and there was help in less than 30 minutes by the time I kind of came out of the ICU or whatever. And they suddenly realized, just because somebody saw a name tag, he connected, made a few calls, and somebody could identify. Otherwise, I landed in the middle of, in a way, I didn't know anybody there, and nobody knew, and I'm sure my family and everybody would have got very worried. So that's, I think, a very, very touchy thing. I think one thing which did change my life a bit after that. So didn't do any more that kind of lifestyle and that many flights. So this lockdown is a big savior that we can do most of the meetings online now.
No, beautiful. I think Neil, we wish you a very hearty and a healthy life. But it's one of those moments in life which will remain with you forever. I mean, each time you hear about it, you think about it, just gives you goosebumps. I mean,
It did. And I didn't realize you'll talk about it, of course. And it reminded me back, and yeah, absolutely.
no,
Took me
beautiful.
back.
Gentlemen, a big thank you to everybody. I think it's been an outstanding conversation. So thank you very much for taking out time on a Saturday and making this happen. And Sharmaji, you can send the invoice to Anuj's place, and he will sign it off the villa for you.
Thank you.
And
Thank you.
and thanks to all the attendees. And I'm going to see everyone again on next Saturday with another new set of leaders on another very interesting topic on how to handle monies in these challenging times. And until then, take good care of yourself. Stay healthy. Stay safe. Namaskar. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you very
Thank
much.
you.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you,
Thank
Neil.
you.
Thank you, Deepak. Thank you, Manoj. Thank you.
Thank
Anuj.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Thank you. Bye.